Hello, my name is John Money, and welcome to Bath College for the big conversation. We are live on the internet and also in front of our audience here in the college's theatre. Hello to you, our audience. Not bad. Who said getting young people engaged in politics was almost impossible? We are also delighted and very privileged to be joined by the Right Worshipful, the Mayor of Bath, Councillor Cherry Beath. A very warm welcome to you. Now, the format for today is pretty relaxed. It's more of a discussion than a debate, but this event is for you. So if any of you people in the audience have a question at any point, please raise your hand, make yourself known. I will be constantly on the move, like a shark in shallow waters, armed with a microphone, and we will try and get through as many of your questions as possible. Now, it may well have proved almost impossible to get the leaders of the major political parties in this country to agree to the terms and conditions of a live chit-chat, but here in Bath, we have been much more fortunate, and I'm delighted to say that all 6 of our local candidates are with us this afternoon. So, it is time to meet them. Would you please welcome for the Conservative Party, Ben Howlett. For the Green Party, Dominic Tristram. Your independent candidate, Lorraine Morgan Brinkhurst. For Labour, Ollie Middleton. Representing the Liberal Democrats, Steve Bradley. And for UKIP, Julian Deverell. And finally, would you please welcome my co-host for the big conversation, Carol Stott.
Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. I'm Carol. I'm chair of this wonderful college here in Bath. I also chair the National Association of Colleges, and it's great to have so many of you joining us for what I think is going to be a very interesting hour or so of conversation with your parliamentary candidates for the forthcoming election. As John has said, it's going to be very informal. The questions are all generated by the students' candidates, and hopefully you will be able to respond to them. But before we get into the formal questions, a little exercise for you. So, randomly, when you were coming in, 32 of the students here today will have been given a little voting device, a little keyboard. And I'm going to ask you to use that twice during this afternoon. Can you just indicate, I'm not trying to point out who you are, but can I just check, can I just see some nods to check that people do have them? They are around, good, thank you. Okay, so what I'm going to ask you to do is, in a minute, I'm going to ask you to indicate at this stage, before you've heard what anybody has to say, who do you think you're going to vote for? An indication of who you're going to vote for. And you'll see the numbers up there. If you think you're going to vote Conservative, number 1, etc., right down to UKIP, number 6. And if you haven't decided yet who you're going to vote for, then press number 7. Okay, thank you. Hopefully you've all pressed. Now, I'm not going to show you the results now. Sorry to disappoint you. What I am going to do is when we get to the end of the discussions this afternoon, I'm going to ask you to vote again. And just to see whether any of your views have changed. And then we'll show the results of both of those polls at the end of our conversation this afternoon. So, that's the lineup for today, and I think it's over to you now, John.
Thank you, Carol. Now, here at Bath College, we have over 4,500 eligible voters, but do they actually know who they are voting for? We sent some students to find out.
We're asking who if he knows who they are. Okay.
Do you know who this is?
No.
Okay, this?
No.
This one? Wow.
Not a clue.
That one?
No.
And him?
No, that's...
Okay. Do you talk to me they're all politicians?
Oh, that's probably why then.
I have no idea.
What about him?
Comes from Bath, that's all.
Okay. Do you know him?
They're all from Bath, aren't they? No, I don't know him either.
Her?
No, I don't know her.
Jack. Him?
No, I don't know him. He looks a bit younger.
Him?
Nah.
Where Would you be surprised to know that they are all political candidates for Bath?
Well, I wouldn't be surprised that they're for Bath. There's a lot of Bath in the background, but they don't look particularly political.
No.
Him?
No.
What about her? Him? Him? What about him? No. Would you be surprised to know they're all political candidates for Bath?
Really?
Yeah.
More you know.
Who these people are? Him?
No,
Him?
no.
Him?
Well, I know he's just 18. He's quite young.
Him?
I met him once because he came to speak to his student union.
Her?
No,
And him.
no.
And would you be surprised to know they are all political candidates for Bath?
Yes.
Do you know who this is?
No.
Him?
No. No.
Him? Her? Him?
No.
And him.
Definitely not.
Would you be surprised to know they are all political candidates for Bath?
Did not know that.
So, quite an interesting response there, candidates, and I imagine slightly disappointing. So, why do you think it is that eligible young voters don't know who you are? Steve, if I can come to you first, the Liberal Democrats currently hold this seat and currently are in government. What's your response to what the young voters had to say there?
I mean, obviously, I would say it's disappointing. So I don't need my microphone for this, Carl.
Yes, you do.
Fantastic, thank you.
Yeah, you will all need your microphones.
Lovely, good afternoon, everybody. Is this on? Is this on, actually?
Yes.
Brilliant. I mean, it's disappointing that young people don't know who we are. I think Ollie got a half a recognition and I got 3/4 of a one. But none of us can be pleased with the fact that we weren't recognised. I think there's probably a number of reasons why. Firstly, we're all new candidates standing for the seat in Bath. I'm sure if people were asked who the current MP is, it would have been a different matter. I find about 90% of people I speak to in Bath know who Don Foster is as the current MP here. They recognise him. He's got one of the best recognition factors of any MP in the country. I'm very proud that that's the case. Shows you how hard he's worked. I'm sure that if any of us get elected, we will work just as hard and our profiles will be raised. But at the moment, we're unknown quantities, I guess, young people like yourselves.
Okay, so Ben, can I ask you to respond? What are you going to say to encourage young people to vote?
Absolutely. It is disappointing. I agree with what Steve just said, that you don't necessarily know who we are. And that means we've got to work incredibly hard to engage with young people across the board in different ways. And to be frank, the trust in politics, the trust in party politics is lower than it has been for when I was certainly going through university. And the way that politicians communicate with young people has changed. So, I get more Facebook messages and tweets from younger people than I do from older people, for example, and I get more letters from older people than I do from younger people. And we've got to engage in different ways to make sure that you're integrated in the decision-making process in Bath, not just at the parliamentary level, but also at the local council level as well, because your vote at this election will really, really make a difference. It's a huge opportunity for you, not just an opportunity for a once-in-a-generation change in Bath, but also you are one of the few people in the country who will be able to decide who will be the next Prime Minister as well. That's an incredibly exciting thing, and that's the prospect that you're going to have to decide at the upcoming election in May.
Okay, thank you. So Ben says your vote will make a difference. One of the things the students say is, how can one voice make a difference? Ollie, how would you respond to that?
If I can untangle the microphone. I mean, I don't actually know if this is even working.
It is.
Working?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
Just hold it close.
I think what we saw there was certainly representative of the wider problem in politics that we have. I personally dispute apathy when talking about young people. I don't believe that young people are apathetic. I believe young people often have very strong views on a whole host of political issues. But what I believe has happened is young people have become disillusioned with the political process. I believe the connection between young people and seeing politics and politicians, i.e. us as a vehicle for change, has been lost. That's something we've really got to try and re-establish. There are obviously massive issues with trust. I feel there are real issues with representation. However, I don't feel all is lost. I think there are things we can do, and in the Labour Party I'm really pleased that we're committed to votes at 16, for example, trying to get young people engaged from as early as possible. And
I hate to interrupt. Can I just ask you to switch the on button on the microphone? Sorry.
So it wasn't actually.
Sorry, I apologise. You could all check your microphones.
That sounds like it's actually
we could
on
hear you,
now.
but that's
so,
okay.
Obviously, hopefully
That's
they
thrown
heard
me
that.
now,
But yeah, I think there are things we can do. I mean, I'd also like to see political education in schools, for example. I think it's really important. I'd like to see political education integrated into the curriculum from secondary age onwards. I'd also like to see online voting. These are all ways that we can ensure that we are doing more to engage young people in the political process. I think it's really important, but clearly, as we saw there, we've got a long way to go.
Okay, so let me give you a quote from one of our media students. I've always thought that politicians were just a bunch of old men sat around a table trying to make everyone's lives easier. What do you actually do to appeal to young people? Lorraine, do you want to?
Thank you.
Not being an old man, you can
No,
respond to that.
exactly, no. I don't know. Is it on? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you very much. Well, that's maybe part of the reason that I decided to enter the race as a candidate in January. I was born in Bath. I've lived here all of my life. I was mayor in 2002, and I've been very involved with the city as a councillor for 20 years. But I first started getting involved with the city and in the community when I was your age, and I think that was really, really important. But I also realised over the last few years that really we do need to involve our community a lot more. So in January I made that decision to become an independent candidate, and I believe that what I can bring, and as a woman as well, but also the experience of having had a family, children who actually came to the City of Bath College, as well as some who went on to university. So I think it's about involving the community, but also for me, it's about being the voice for Bath. I won't have a political party behind me telling me how to vote. So as an independent in Parliament, as your MP, I will have the opportunity to vote for policies that are right for Bath. So that's partly why I entered the race. At the moment, unless anybody else comes forward, I'm the token lady, and it's just a pleasure to have this opportunity to represent my city.
Okay, so Julian, then, a word from you. Why should I vote? That's what the students often say. Why should I vote?
Well, I
How
think,
would you respond?
one of the reasons that I got involved in politics to begin with is that I am very, very passionate about democracy. And I think when you look at countries around the world that don't have democracy, people are often, they're out on the streets fighting for it to try and get it. So your vote does make a difference. But I can see exactly why you may have become cynical, because we go out and vote every few years, and then we do see the political class sometimes behaving in quite an immature way, sometimes in a way that that is quite disreputable. And I think that it's not surprising to see that people have become disconnected and cynical with politics. And I think that by putting more democracy and more power back into the hands of people, that's what I'm passionate about doing. And UKIP have actually got quite a lot of policies involving direct democracies and local referendums, things like that, to engage people between elections, because that's what's going to get people more interested in the issues that affect their lives. Because all the things that we're going to talk about today, they all do affect you, and they are really, really important things. I think it's imperative that you are more involved in them than you are at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Can I just point out that none of those people said they weren't interested in politics. They said they didn't recognise any of you. So anybody want to jump in and say what you're going to do to make sure that they know who you are and what you're going to do for them? Because they didn't recognise you. And I know, Steve, you said, well, we're all new. We're not the sitting member of Parliament. But is there something, to come back to you, because you started this off, is there something that you think you might do to make sure that you're known by this constituent?
Yeah, I mean,
God, that's slightly strange, actually. Yeah, I mean, there's clearly a lot we can and should do. I'm going to continue doing what I've been doing for the last year or more around Bath, which is going on doorsteps, speaking to as many people as I can every single day of the week, going to as many events as I can. I've been to numerous events in Bath College and elsewhere. I think it was interesting, there was one young lady on the videotape who said that I'd come and spoken at her student union or at her school. So I'm doing as many of those events as I can. It's difficult. This is a city of 90,000 people, and very often, it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on this, but very often there's a perception that it's particularly hard to get through to young people. So I'm trying to engage in as many physical ways as I can, but also in terms of social media. I've got a very active presence in new media, especially on Twitter. So hopefully over time, and it does take time to build a profile, hopefully over time we can start addressing the lack of recognition that was there for most of us.
Okay, so let's just wrap up this section now, and I'm going to go over to John. I'm sure but there are other points you want to make about this. We'll give you the opportunity. Sorry, okay. Lorraine and Ollie, very quickly, quickly, if you want to come in.
Yes, you're right about presence. It's about engaging with the young people. In Newbridge, I've had 5 elections over the last 20 years, and the last election I had the 3rd highest turnout of voters over Bath and North East Somerset Council. Now I want to engage with the rest of the city to enable people to know that I'm the right person for them.
Okay, thank you. You wanted to say something, Ollie, very
Yeah,
quickly.
I just wanted to quickly pick up a point that you made before about, why vote, why engage in democracy. Well, fundamentally, I think we've got to put our trust into the power of collective action. If we look at history, we look at all the changes that have happened over the past 100 years, whether it's those that fought for the right for us to vote in the first place, or those that fought for workers' rights or the minimum wage. All of those changes have been brought about through the vehicle of politics, through people directly engaging with the system, and through people primarily voting. So you know what, we really do have to vote. It's the only real means for change we have. And I think, when people like Russell Brand do say and almost suggest kind of sitting back, doing nothing, waiting for the system to change, that's very much at odds with history.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this question for now and hand over to John.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very excited now to introduce to you the spinning wheel of issues. Yeah, I know.
Ooh,
yep, steady.
drum roll.
So called because I have a wheel and it spins, and like me, it is has some major issues. Absolutely. I'm going to give it a spin now, and I have a related question to all of these topics. We have housing, benefits, social equality, our future, culture, NHS, youth, and mental health. So a pretty wide range of topics there. We give it a spin, and it falls on mental health. And now this question comes from a stone masonry student. And the question is this: can you go into politics even if you have a mental health disability? Can you go into politics even if you have a mental health disability? Now, would anybody in the audience like a particular candidate to take that question? Yeah, yes, who would you like to hear from? From our UKIP candidate. Okay, so if you could answer that, please. Can you go into politics even if you have a mental health disability?
I suppose the short answer for this is, I think yes. I think, whatever issues you may have had in your life in the past, or whatever issues you may be suffering from, there is an opportunity to go in, and you do ultimately have the opportunity to do whatever you want in your life. And I think that certainly when I look back through the various sort of trials and tribulations of my own life and growing up and all sorts of things, I was not a perfect kind of model citizen as I sort of grew up, in a working class environment. I think it's very, very important that people do have the opportunity to get involved, and I think mental illness covers a broad spectrum of issues, and I think that when you look at the number of people that have suffered mental illness, you may even be surprised. There's an awful lot of people that have, back on their medical records and things like that. So, absolutely, is the short answer.
Would anybody else of our candidates like to just briefly touch on that? Yes?
Thank you. Well, I spent 25 years in Bath working in the health service, and I believe it's, for somebody who has had that experience, is that health problem in their lives, they can bring something of so great knowledge into Parliament and for the communities, not only the communities of their cities or the towns, that knowledge that they've got and the experiences they've had, they could help make change in policies that will affect the whole of the country. So I believe that everybody should have that opportunity, whatever's been happening in their lives, those life experiences, as Julian said, I have experiences myself of bringing up my 6 children and the trials and tribulations of that. So I know that I could go into Parliament and I would be able to take those life experiences and hopefully help make a difference to those policies for the better of everybody in this country.
Thank you. 6 children, that's enough to cause a mental illness. Our Liberal Democrat, you wanted to have a quick word on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should aim as a society to have a parliament that reflects that society as closely as possible. I think the figure is roughly 1 in every 2, so half of all people at some stage in their life will suffer from some form of mental illness. It could be a certain level of depression, or it could be schizophrenia or something more serious, or some of the issues around, say, dementia, for example. So we need to ensure that our parliament reflects the type of people in there. And for example, very close to here, one of the Liberal Democrat MPs came out about a year ago and revealed that she'd been a victim of child abuse, and it had had a very big impact on her. I think it's important to have voices like that in Parliament. In this city, Dawn Foster, the MP, about 10 years ago, suffered from stomach cancer and was extremely ill, managed to get through that. I think, again, that's another example of somebody bringing their own experiences. And I'm very, very proud that the Liberal Democrats in government are the party who are finally addressing the stigma which exists around mental health. And I'll give you one very quick example. At the moment, until recently, until we changed the policy, you had targets within the health service for dealing with physical conditions. So if you turned up with a broken leg, hospitals had to treat you in a certain way in a certain period of time. There was absolutely no targets and no rules over what they would do if you presented yourself with an eating disorder or with schizophrenia or with other mental health conditions. So we've changed that. We've now created parity of esteem within the NHS between physical and mental health. We've done a lot of work around ensuring that we don't criminalise people when they have mental health episodes, so that we don't, because too often people with mental health issues, their first port of contact with authorities is the police, not with people who can, in the health service, who can really help them.
Okay,
so I'm proud of what we've done to help address that.
Thank you very much. We're going to spin the wheel again. Let's get a different issue from the spinning wheel of issues. This time, the pointer alights on, well, that is what is called the law of sod. And it's back on mental health, so let's spin that again. And this time it's, I think that's benefits. That's benefits as far as I know. This question comes from Scarlett, who is not a student. And she says, what are you doing to take the shame out of benefits? Setting up a business, you don't know what your income will be for the first couple of years. Housing benefit allows you to keep paying rent until your income is established. But those I know receiving it are too ashamed to tell anyone or admit to it. So what are you going to do to take the shame out of benefits? Indeed, is being on benefits shameful in the first place? Would anybody like to hear from a particular candidate on that issue? Yes. Okay, Dominic. For the Green Party? But being on benefits or taking benefits, be it housing benefit, unemployment benefit, is that shameful?
No, of course it's not. I have a problem with the language that's used by most of the parties now, calling it welfare. It's not welfare, it's social security. We all pay so that we can support the poorest people in society. Any one of us at any point, however successful we are, could end up made redundant or unemployed or something, and we could depend on those benefits. To have any sort of social stigma on that is terrible. And what we've seen is, by the current government, is blaming almost everything on welfare claimants, which are actually a very small proportion of the money that fraudulent benefit claimants are a tiny amount of money compared to the unpaid tax, which we don't really spend any money trying to collect. But it suits the agenda of some parties to say it's all down on these benefits claimants. It's very little to do with them. We now have people 1 million people who have to depend on charity for food because they're told, we will cap payments at some random level. And we hear this language of, it's not right that somebody on benefits can receive more than somebody who works. But those people on benefits could have a number of children. Why should those children live in poverty? Because their parents happen to not have jobs. It's ridiculous.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very briefly, this is the sort of quick fire section, if you want to add a few words there.
Yeah, I mean, partly to back up something that Dominic said, I think certainly under the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats, we've seen a demonisation
of those on benefits, of the poorest and most vulnerable in society. And I think we've got to remember something. It's not as simple as those out of work and those not, scroungers and strivers, as George Osborne referred to them. We've actually got a situation where 60% of social security recipients are actually in work. We've got a situation where central government is simply subsidising low pay. So actually what we've got to try and do is tackle low pay through things like the living wage. I'm really pleased the Labour Party is committed to raising the minimum wage to £8 an hour. We're also committed to reinstating the 10p starting rate of tax. So hopefully we'll begin to tackle low pay and hopefully get that social security bill down, and also be able to tackle poverty in the process.
Thank you. I'm going to spin the wheel one more time. We're going to keep this conversation moving, and this time we're on housing. And allow me to turn my page. Our question from housing comes from James, a business student. How are you going to help the young people of Bath buy a house? Good Lord. How are you going to help the young people of Bath buy a house? So nice and quick, please. Anybody like to hear from a particular candidate on this issue? Yes? The Tories, please. Our Conservative. Nice and brief, please. How are you going to help the young people of Bath buy a house?
Absolutely, I'll be as quick as possible on this one. So I'm someone who can't afford to get on the property ladder in Bath myself, and with the statistics of 5,000 people plus on the social housing waiting list, and also the fact that Bath is the third least affordable city anywhere in the UK, we've got to be building more affordable homes. So the council set a 40% affordable housing target, and it's got to be met. And that means we need to be upfronting the costs in order to deliver those homes as well. But as lovely as it is that the money can be available in order to build these things, what about people who can't afford to get on the property ladder in the first place? So as something this government has done and something we're committing to going forwards from the Conservative side, we would like to see the Help to Buy scheme extended. We'd also, things like the 20% discount on brownfield sites need to be extended to more young families. For decades, the successive governments haven't built enough housing in this country, and we need to be freeing up as much brownfield land as possible in order to deliver that too.
Thank you.
That's a big priority of mine.
And a final very brief word from our independent candidate.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very passionate about us trying to make sure that we can have more affordable housing in the city, more new builds, more part buy, part rent. I still have two sons in their 30s who are still living at home. So I absolutely know how hard it is. We also need to have more support in enabling them to get mortgages. And also, if there's more housing out there, that could hopefully bring down the rental prices. Because my daughter with 3 children is living in a rented house, and it's £1,100, and that's before she pays any other bills. So we do need more affordable housing, use of brownfield sites, and I think that will make a big, big difference to housing in the city of Bath.
Thank you very much. We will return to the spinning wheel of issues a little bit later, but now, Carol, back to you.
Okay, thank you. So those are quick-fire questions. I'm going to move on to another issue now that you can elaborate on a bit further. And this question's come from 2 of our media students, James and Callum, and it's on a topic very dear to my heart. The question is, how will your policies benefit the college, or negatively affect it, in fact? And will we even notice any changes you make? Anybody want to volunteer to jump in? Yeah.
Well, one of our policies is to actually fund students in colleges like this one as to the same level as secondary school students get. So, I mean, at the moment, you all receive less money per pupil than you would if you're at secondary school, which I don't think is right. We would also bring a lot of the way that all education works, not just colleges but secondary schools, back into local education authority control. At the moment, the emphasis seems to be to give everyone independence and let them do what they want, more or less. But actually that has a disadvantage to a lot of students because you don't have the democratic control of a local council. At the moment, it's less true at the college, but certainly in academies and free schools, the local authority really doesn't have any control really over what they do. What we'd like to see is, if anything receives public money, it should be something you can vote and change. That's the way to get people interested in politics, not just say these sort of arm's length bodies that have been set up where they get public money and there's no control over what they do with it. And we'd like to see also colleges like this just being open to more people, just at any point of life. The adult education side of things is certainly less available now than when I was younger, and we'd like to see that changed.
Okay, thank you. So Ben, I don't think the Conservatives have committed to the 16 to 18-year-old funding being equal with school funding up to 16.
I want to come on to that in a second, but just to say, you are in a multi-academy trust college here, and I know a lot of governors probably will be raising their eyebrows in relation to what the Green Party have just said there. I can guarantee from our side that you wouldn't have to come under local education authority control or any other type of centralised control. You would still be able to run your own governance by yourselves if the Conservatives do take control of the government fully after the election. In terms of 16 to 18 funding, you're quite right, that hasn't been announced yet. There's quite a lot of us who have been working very hard in the Conservative Party to not just improve the status of vocational education, and I've been doing that an awful lot over the last 10 years with my hat on when I used to run the youth wing of the Conservative Party. We've started to develop some policies around that with the government as young members of the party itself, but also the fact that we need to be giving fair and adequate funding for that as well. And to be frank, you've got a very good point there, that until the money is up-fronted by the government in order to pay for the things that they're saying, then to be frank, we might as well be hitting our head against a brick wall. So I don't necessarily toe my own party line's whip on that, but that's my own personal view.
Okay, thank you. Julian, do you want to come in?
Yeah, well, one of, as outlined in a lot of UKIP's education policies, we believe in a much more diverse education system that allows a lot more choice for people, and we fully support the idea of independent establishments and also increasing, things like free schools, grammar schools, all those sorts of things. We don't believe that heavy state control and standardisation of education is a good way to go, as Dominic said. I think in terms of exactly how we can benefit you in the college, I think if I gave you a nice little bullet-pointed list of things we could do in terms of increased funding, etc., I'll be making that up because we haven't gone into that level of detail with our education policy yet. So I'll keep it honest and tell you that, explain some of the basic principles of it.
So does UKIP have a policy on further education?
We have a basic policy on further education, as I've outlined. But like all the parties, we haven't released a full manifesto yet. So it will be coming out, very, very, very soon.
Thank you. Ollie and then Steve, and I will come to you.
Yeah, I mean, when the last Labour government came into power in 1997, we had a far lower proportion of people going on to university. And it was really important for the government at the time to make sure that everyone had the opportunity to go and do a degree and attend university. But now something that we've talked a lot about nationally, something Ed Miliband's talked a lot about, is the forgotten 50%, the other 50% of people who may be pursuing an academic route may not necessarily be the right route to pursue. And something that we're committed to is a technical baccalaureate from 16 to 19 years of age, focused on vocational qualifications. The idea would be that this is part of a greater vision of vocational qualifications, and we're also committed to high-skilled, high-quality apprenticeships, 80,000 high-skilled, high-quality apprenticeships. The idea would be that every single 18 or 19-year-old leaving college or leaving sixth form would have the opportunity to go into an apprenticeship or pursue perhaps the more conventional route and go and do a degree.
Okay, so just before we move on, can I just ask the audience, how many of you feel like the forgotten 50% here at college? Okay, only a handful. So
the idea is at the moment, so we've got a situation where 50% of people roughly go to university. And the idea is we want to shift the emphasis. Obviously, we still want to focus on the 50% that do go to university, but we also want to focus on the 50% who maybe don't want to go to university, or maybe, as I said, it's not the right route to pursue. We want to make sure that we're also opening up options for those people as well. And the way we see it, we have a real skill shortage at the moment. So it's only right that we should also be focusing on vocational alternatives as well.
Could I just butt in here very, very briefly? We hear a lot about percentages and the 50% that do or don't go to university or whatever, but where I come from on this is that it's about offering the individual what they need, and we all have different individual needs and different styles of education, be it apprenticeships or things that are more academic. When I was at school, I wasn't the sort of archetypal school person. I left school when I was 14. I hated it. And I actually came to this college when I was 15 and absolutely loved it. It was about creating lots of different educational environments that allow everybody a chance to succeed, be that as something very, very academic or be that as something very, very practical. That's essentially where our education principles come from.
But you have said we have yet to see that translate into what
in terms of numbers, funding, costing, percentages, those sorts of details, absolutely.
Okay.
But the principle of it is that we respect that people are individuals. They shouldn't be seen as percentages. And it's important that everybody, irrespective of what type of education they need, is given an opportunity to thrive in the right sort of environment.
So you will fund that? UKIP would fund
well,
that?
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
We'll back up our principles with money, yes, of course.
Steve.
Yeah, we do a lot of hostings, and we're used to hearing Julian say that UKIP haven't got particular policies on particular issues. Liberal Democrats have a very clear set of policies on further education. I'll outline briefly 6 steps, Steve, in which we would help this college. Firstly, we believe in securing cradle-to-college funding. At the moment, only the school's budget within government is protected, and that's thanks to the Liberal Democrats in government that is protected. But we want to do better. We want to ensure very early years education, so nursery, childcare, everything from the 0 to 4-year-old is protected, but also the 16 to 18-year-old education. So if the Liberal Democrats are in government again, we will look to protect and guarantee the funding that this college receives. Secondly, to make life easier for students, the age of school leavership was raised from 16 to 18 years old. We want to bring in a discount bus pass, which will give you 2/3 discount under the age of 21 to help you get to college, to university, or to your place of work. And it's partly to reflect the fact that government is now asking that you stay longer in education and to provide some help for that. Thirdly, we want to introduce lifelong learning accounts. We've got a lot of young people in the room today. It's great to see that. But as we all know, not everybody who comes to Bath College is necessarily a young person. We want to encourage people to learn throughout their entire life and to find a way of funding to enable that to happen. Fourth, independent career advice. It's something that we hear a lot from other colleges isn't particularly good. I don't hear those complaints from here, I'm glad to say. Fifth, we want to make colleges who are willing to do it into national centres of excellence. Just at the back of this college, the council, the Liberal Democrat-run council, is creating an area with 9,000 jobs called Innovation Key. It will be a landmark centre for the UK in terms of high-tech, creative and digital jobs. Fantastic opportunities for everybody in this room and everybody elsewhere in the city. So if this college wanted to, it could be a national centre of excellence, training people up so you can all take advantage of those jobs or jobs in other sectors in the city. And finally, I'm glad Ollie mentioned the forgotten 50%. I mean, it is a simple fact of life that it was Labour, when they were in government, who forgot that 50%. It was Labour who had a policy of pushing 50% of young people towards university and completely forgot about everybody else. I'm really proud to say that thanks to the Liberal Democrats, it was one of our policies at the last election, we focus on apprenticeships as a way of providing options for those who don't want to go to university. We've created over 2 million nationally and almost 1,800 in the city of Bath, and we will look to do the same again if we're in government again, create another 2 million. So there are 6 very clear steps which the Liberal Democrats would do, which will help life for this college and also for all the students who come here.
Okay, and finally, Lorraine, do you want to?
Yes, thank you very much. Just to say to Ollie, many years ago, this building, this college was called the City of Bath Technical College. So it's almost like we're coming full circle now with all the policies that the major parties are talking about today. There definitely needs to be more investment, particularly with the age of students staying on in further education. Going back to my 6 children, 2 of my children went on to university after 6th form, 2 actually came here to City of Bath College, and 2 went and took on apprenticeships in businesses in the city. So I would, for me, because I'm an independent, I don't have a policy to give you now, but I will have that freedom to vote for the right policies in government that are right for the City of Bath. So for me, it's about listening, finding out what are the needs, what do all the students want for their future. For me, running a business the last 10 years, I had an events business. I've been so pleased when I get emails from students asking if they can come and do some work experience for me. So there's so much choice now, and what I want to do is continue to encourage that choice so that every student has the best opportunity to move forward in life down the route that they want to take.
Okay, so just very quickly before we go back to the spinning wheel, anybody in the audience want to ask a quick question of anyone specifically about what they've just heard?
Yeah, there is a hand up here, so let me just come to you. Your question, please.
Yeah, my question's for Ollie. Basically, you're quite young, which might help sort of the college students.
I hope so.
But yeah, my question is, how do you react to people who say you're too young, you haven't had experience, you don't really know, like what older people might.
Do you want me to take this out?
Just, yeah, take that very briefly, Ollie. Very
It's a really good question. I always react by pointing out that actually I think the way that we should be valuing our politicians on the basis of life experience. I personally believe that actually politics and parliament should be representative. I believe it should be a cross-section of society because that's how we reach a common consensus and a form of politics that works for all. I believe that naturally has to include young people. So I believe actually we need to be seeing more young people certainly voting, certainly engaging in politics, but definitely standing as candidates as well.
Okay, thank you. John, over to you and the spinning wheel.
Yep, I'm going to brave a paper cut or a splinter once again. Let's see how we go this time. Still plenty of issues left. This time, youth comes up. Let me find our youth question. This question, all right, nice and simple. When did you last have a conversation with a young person? And what was it about?
Not counting today.
Not including today and not including campaigning or family. When did you last have a conversation with a young person and what was it about? Would anybody like to make sure that question goes to any particular candidate?
This isn't really going to be particularly applicable to me.
He does talk to yourself a lot.
Yes, at the back. Our Green Party candidates. Yeah, so when did you last speak to a young person? What was it about?
Not including campaigning is awkward because obviously we're campaigning all the time. But I do talk to, I'm one of those annoying people, probably for a lot of you, who talk to the person who happens to sit next to them on the bus or the train. Because, that's what public transport's about, isn't it? Having some conversation. And so it just so happened that the last time I got the train, which was to Liverpool, which is a long way, there was somebody who was probably about 16 sat next to me. Because I was on my way up to our party conference in Liverpool, and we had a really good talk about not just politics, because it's a long journey, but absolutely everything about what their life, what they were doing, what they were hoping to achieve. And I think young people are much maligned in this country. I mean, there's this fear that a lot of older people have that they see groups of young people hanging about and they think they're just going to cause trouble or shoplift or something. And actually, they're just normal people like everyone else. And if you engage with them and talk to them, they're perfectly nice. And I have absolutely no qualms about just engaging with anyone, any age. And I don't think being young or old is a barrier to just getting on with anyone you like. And it's good for us to know the issues that young people have.
Okay, thank you. Strangers talking to me on a train is precisely why I drive. Let's spin this one more time. We've done, let's move on to, we've done housing as well. We've done benefits, social equality. Okay, the question is, do you believe social equality can be achieved in a monetary-based society? If yes, why and how? Do you believe social equality can be achieved in a monetary-based society? Again, would anybody in the audience like any particular candidate to answer that question? Yeah, the Conservative candidate, please.
Yes, I do, and I know it sounds unusual because you've probably got a predisposed view about what the Conservative Party stand for, and I appreciate that. But actually, there's a lot of things that can be done, and as someone who grew up in a household where my mother's disabled, I've seen the people who don't have enough support needing a lot more support, like her, and people that actually who are unfortunately in this spiral of decline. It's happening here in one of the wealthiest cities anywhere in the UK, being trapped in that welfare system. And I think we really need radical solutions in order to solve those problems. So for generations, for the times when the economy is growing very, very well, we're still seeing a rise in inequality in our society. So how do we end up reducing that inequality? And for me, it's actually saying the state isn't actually the best solution to provide the support that people really need. And there are some amazing charities, some amazing social enterprises in Bath that are working incredibly hard on a day-to-day basis that aren't getting the support that they need from the government, from the council, etc., in order to help them and help them get out of that poverty trap. I want more support given to people like my mum and others like her, and actually for the state to withdraw its support, withdraw that blanket away from people who can get into a job. And that's why I'm really pleased with the jobs figures that are being created, because it is the first step on that process.
Thank you, Ben. There's only 3 topics left on the wheel. I could spin it for hours and they wouldn't land on them. That would be typical. The topics we have left here are our future, culture, and NHS, I believe. So can you show me a raise of hands if you would like to hear the question asked on our future? Okay, what about a question on the NHS? And what about a question on culture? Okay, we'll go with the NHS question. That seems to be interest most people here in the room. This question comes from Jamie Webster, who is a Access to Higher Education student. He writes, the closure of the walk-in centre in town has put massive pressure on the RUH and removed a convenient second option for many Bath residents, particularly students who may choose to register in their home rather than term time location. What would you do to rectify this problem? So the closure of the walk-in centre in town, what would you do to rectify this problem? Anybody like to take that particular question at all? Yes, okay.
Thank you very much. As I mentioned earlier, I've worked in the health service for 25 years. I worked in 3 GP practices in Bath, and I worked at the Royal United Hospital. And we know that a lot of residents were really, really upset when the walk-in centre closed and everything was moved to the RUH. And it isn't as accessible as it could be. So what the governments need to do, and governments of all colours have just not invested enough into the NHS. And maybe now the time to support the local GP practices so that they could help, they could assist. They have the skill set within their GP practices. We have quite a few in the city centre. So why not invest more money in? If we can't reopen a walk-in centre, let's find other ways to be able to make that happen. But it has to be accessible to all. And I do believe that with the RUH, just that little bit out of the city centre, it can be very difficult for people. Not everybody drives. Some people have to use public transport. Some people find it very difficult with disabilities. So you do need it to be accessible to all.
Thank you, Lorraine. Very quickly then, Steve.
Yeah, I mean, it's very disappointing when the walk-in centre closed. We need better access to health provision in this country, not more difficult. But I think to help achieve that, we should have new models for how people can access health. I would like to see health provision brought closer to people. So why not look at, for example, the one-stop shop model? The council has opened a number of one-stop shops in very handy locations in the centre of town. Let's also look to provide health within there. And very finally, NHS itself has said very clearly to all political parties it needs £8 billion extra funding every year to be sustainable. It asked the parties would they provide it. The Liberal Democrats have said we would, and we've outlined exactly where the money would come from. So far, the Conservatives and Labour have said they will only provide £2 billion. So we cannot get better facilities without the funding.
Ollie, very, very briefly, then I'm going to take a question from this lady.
Yeah, I mean, interesting, Steve saying it's disappointing to see the walk-in centre shut. It's actually the Liberal Democrat-run council that shut the walk-in centre. The only opposition, you voted for it, Steve. Your party voted for it. The only opposition to the closure of the walk-in centre actually came from the Labour Party and our councillors on the council. It was terrible to see it shut. It has had an impact, but it's not just about the closure of the walk-in centre. Under the Tories and Lib Dems, we've lost a lot of frontline staff. The social care budget has been cut by 20%. That's put a lot of impact on the front line. So we want to invest more money, get frontline staff up.
Okay, we're going to take a question here from the audience. Yes, please.
You're talking all about with the walk-in centres and say how people should go to GPs, but most of the time GPs are chosen about 4 o'clock, and half the time people don't have can't come home late, so they can't go to them, will you be willing to get more longer time to GPs and make them work later for more people or students?
Because I mentioned that.
Okay, I'm going to let Dominic come in.
The reality is GPs don't work for the NHS, they work for themselves, nearly all of them, as a private business. We would bring all GPs in to work for the NHS directly over time, because at the moment we can't make them do anything. That's why they have these hours. The government has to bung money at them to open on Saturdays or open in the evenings, but the reality is they're contractors, effectively, to the NHS. They're not part of it. So that's the thing that has to be dealt with.
Okay, Ben, very briefly.
The honest answer is that as a result of the GP contract, which came in under the previous government, there is very little that can be done to force GPs to work longer hours. However, just in 1 square mile in Bath, there are 11 GP practices currently. And as it stands, according to statistics, people aren't accessing them as much as they could be, for example. So it's about maximising your knowledge of how to access your GP very, very quickly. How many of you, if I'm allowed to ask this, how many of you have accessed the 111 service recently or actually picked up the phone and called them? There's a few people. The 111 service has had some awful teething problems locally, and recent meetings I've been feeding in a lot of the issues that you've been mentioning to the clinical commissioning group, and they will be looking at re-tendering those services to actually make sure it's fit for purpose for the future.
Thank you, Ben. This gentleman wanted to ask a question.
This one is directed specifically at the Tories and the Lib Dems. Despite assurances that you will protect the NHS, over 7 million NHS contracts have now been awarded to private companies. So my question is, how can you possibly justify your latest claims to protect the NHS in your re-elections in light of this?
Okay, Steve, do you want to take that first?
Yeah, firstly, as I mentioned earlier, the best way, I believe, to protect the NHS is to give the NHS the funding it tells us it needs. And I'll repeat again, they said they needed £8 billion to be sustainable. They challenged all political parties to say to provide that. We are the only political party who said we would and said how we would do it. In terms of NHS contracts, we may or may not hear from the Labour candidate, but the reality is that the issuing of some contracts within the NHS into the private sector began under Labour. 83% of all the money which has been put into private hands by the NHS happened under Labour. And to be honest, I'll give you my personal view on this. My sister is currently going through treatment for chemotherapy, treatment for leukemia. She's gone through, she had a tour the last 18 months. Frankly, I don't really care who's given her the treatment, whether it's done publicly or done privately, so long as it's free when she needs it and it's damn good. Because I don't want dogma to get in the way of the quality of healthcare to members of my family or to members of yours. So to be honest, I don't subscribe to the view that only the private sector can do things right. I think that's nonsense. But likewise, I don't subscribe to the view that only the public sector can get things right. I think sometimes, do you know what? The truth is somewhere in the middle. So I support the idea of looking at new ways of providing healthcare provision. In this city, we've got a social enterprise called Serona, which now delivers a lot of the social care within the city. And that's a fantastic way of doing things which isn't privately owned and isn't public sector. So for me, the bottom line is the quality of healthcare, making sure it's there when you need it and it's good. And I absolutely would not let dogma get in the way of how we provide that.
Okay, thank you. That question was directed at the government, so I think it's only fair, very briefly, Ben, to let you respond.
I was going to say, I'm not a spokesman for the government, I have to admit, but I'll be a spokesman for what my views are. And very much like what Steve has said, I've just watched my grandmother, who's had 8 years' worth of dementia and strokes, pass away in a hospital which provided her with an incredibly good service. But in other areas of that hospital, they have got some significant problems. And for me, I didn't care about the fact that she was in an NHS bed. I was caring more about the fact that her final days were she had a high quality of care. She ended up having a good, efficient service. She ended up having her family around her. And the nursing staff were amazing. They were absolutely superb in that, and I want to make sure that anybody who faces exactly that same problem, I'm sure we'll all end up having to face it, but all of us can go into a hospital and say, okay, I said goodbye to my grandmother, grandfather in the most appropriate way, and that does mean we need to be making sure we stump up the funds for it. All the parties around this table will say, we've got 2 billion here, we've got 8 billion here, etc. The realities are, and I've worked alongside this service for 7 years now, there's a 20 billion black hole that's about to hit the NHS budgets by 2020. A 2 billion or an 8 billion will not fund that. And the NHS become a political football between the Labour Party, the Conservatives and Liberal Democrats for far too long. And I would like to see, and if I do become the MP for Bath, a Royal Commission of a cross-party group to actually address this problem head-on. And I think the only way we're able to resolve the problems that are about to affect our NHS is by working together and not making this party political.
Thank you,
Okay.
Ben.
No, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I'm going to have to move
I'm
us
going
on.
to come to this lady at the very end, though, because we will be taking open questions
We'll
at the
have
end, so
more
I haven't
time.
forgotten you.
Yeah, sorry, we'll have more time for questions later, but I am going to have to move us on now and take us on to the next formally presented question, which is actually about tuition fees. So, those of you who plan to keep tuition fees, do you not think this automatically loses the youth vote? And what effort are you putting into attracting or impressing young people who are not bothering to vote? So, Julian, do you want to...
Well, UKIP's outlined quite a specific policy on tuition fees. We don't agree with tuition fees, and in an ideal world, we would like to see them scrapped. But we are economically realistic. So what we've done is created a policy that would remove tuition fees completely from the STEM subjects, the science, technology, engineering, maths, medicine. It goes part of the way to addressing the issue. And I find it, it's a bit like when we're hearing about the NHS. You get the candidates from the legacy parties typically standing here, or sitting in this case, and making you promises. The famous one with tuition fees in Bath is that 5 years ago, obviously, the Liberal Democrat MP assured the young people of Bath that he would vote to get rid of them. What did he do? You all know the end of the story there. I think it's important that we get back to some more honesty with some of these answers. But tuition fees, what they've effectively done is mean that if those of you that do choose to go to university, you'll probably leave with more debt than maybe your parents paid for their first house, and this is unsecured debt. Some of you have mentioned about being able to buy a house. With the new mortgage regulations that the government brought in recently, combined with student tuition fee debt, you're going to find that even harder to do, certainly a lot harder than my generation ever did. So I think it's vital that we start looking at this and start ditching some of this mainstream politics nonsense.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine.
Thank you very much. Well, this is very close to my heart because for 25 years I was a Liberal Democrat. And in January, I made that decision, as I mentioned earlier, to go independent. And part of that was because of the U-turn on tuition fees. Research has shown that in 2042, 90 billion pounds out of a 200 billion pound student debt will be written off. It will not be paid back by the students because former students will not be able to afford to pay it back. My sons, when they were at university, obviously they're in their 30s now, they didn't have that, the 9,000, but they still needed to survive while they were at university. They still needed to take full student grant loan. So they both came out of university owing £16,000 each. So that was a debt already that my sons, a few years ago, under the previous government, ended up owing. But now they're in great jobs, but they're contributing back to the country through their taxes. So the education they had at university, they are putting back and they're paying through taxes. But on top of that, they still had the money they had to pay back. And now for students, for it to have gone up to £9,000, the pressure on families and students, I think, is not fair. I think it's important that those students that want to go to university have the opportunity, because all of you will contribute in the future, whether you go through college to work or go to university. And that was a strong case for why I went independent, because I felt that the residents and the students of the City of Bath were let down.
Okay, thank you, Lorraine. Ollie?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually personally one of the first years hit by the trebling of tuition fees. It was one of the reasons I got involved with politics. Generally, I felt young people have been hit really hard by the current government. Of course, we had the scrapping of EMA as well. We've still got nearly 1 million young people unemployed. But the thing is, the new system doesn't actually work for anyone. It certainly doesn't work for students. Universities are losing money, which means the government is also losing money as well. Our policy can be summed up by fees down, grants up. We want to reduce tuition fees to £6,000 a year. That will come in from September 2016. So that will make a massive difference to not just future students, but current students as well. It's a realistic policy. It is deliverable. We're the only party that can deliver a reduction in tuition fees.
Okay, we are running out of time, so can I ask you to speed up your responses, Dominic?
Yes, we are the only party offering to scrap tuition fees and restore maintenance grants. This is because we think education is a right. Anyone who tells you it's unaffordable is lying to you. It's just they'd rather put that money into reducing inheritance tax or, for example, tax relief on high-rate pensions. Of course we can do it. It's just most voters are old. That's the thing. If you don't vote, then this will happen. You've got to vote. And then the politicians will pay attention to you and they'll maybe reduce your tuition fees or scrap them.
Ben?
Quick question from the audience. How many of you are not wanting to go to university? Okay, I'll speak to you here in this minute. I think this £6,000, £9,000 argument is pretty ridiculous, to be frank, because in my view, why should it be the case that people who are not going to university are going to now have to subsidise as a result of this reduction from £9,000 down to £6,000 those people that do go to university? In reality, we're looking at trying to create a more equal society, if that's what the Labour Party are trying to end up producing as a result of their policies. And all they're doing is reversing that. And I don't think that's the right argument to be having. You shouldn't have to subsidise people that do go to university.
Okay, I'm going to bring in Steve and then I'll take your question in a minute.
I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate, so I want to tackle the issue of tuition fees head on. It was obviously a torrid time for the Liberal Democrats, 2010. I won't deny that decision around tuition fees. I just want to give you a bit of a backstory to how things got to where they were. I was president of Bath University Students' Union in this city between 1995 and 1997 when Labour came into power and removed the principle of free education. So it's very rich hearing Labour complaining about the situation. They removed the principle of free education. Then in the 2001 election manifesto, Labour said that they not only would they not increase tuition fees, but they said they'd change the law to stop it happening. Yet 3 years later, they trebled tuition fees. Now, most people don't get to hear about that, but that is a simple fact. And then they increased them further, again. In between, Scotland was given devolution. Now, have you ever wondered why you don't pay tuition fees in Scotland? The answer is because the Liberal Democrats were able to deliver our policy there. The first government after Scotland got devolution was Labour and Liberal Democrats. It was only 1 year after Labour had introduced tuition fees nationally. We were able to shame the Scottish Labour Party into supporting our policy. Fast forward to 2010, to the coalition. We tried to do the same with the Conservatives. They had zero interest in doing anything on that. In fact, they wanted tuition fees with no cap, which would have meant some universities in this country charging 10, 15, 20, 30,000 pounds. So basically, you have the Conservatives to thank for people in England pay tuition fees, whereas they don't in Scotland. When we couldn't get our way on tuition fees, we focused on making the policy fairer, and the results show that. There are now more young people going to university in this country than ever before, more people from disadvantaged backgrounds going to university, more people from black, minority, ethnic backgrounds going to university than ever before. It's not the system I would have liked to have seen. We don't get everything in the coalition. We've hit 80% of our manifesto. I wish tuition fees had been part of that. And then two very last points. Lorraine claims that she left the Liberal Democrats over tuition fees. Tuition fees were introduced in 2010. Lorraine left the Liberal Democrat Party in 2015. In between, she stood for election as a councillor and was elected as a Liberal Democrat councillor. And finally, in terms of the Labour Party policy, they've said there were just tuition fees. They haven't said where the money will come from.
They haven't said
Right,
how it will be funded, and within their own party they're hugely divided over it because it will lead to rich students being better off.
Can I stop you there? We said this was going to be a discussion, not a debate.
I'm sorry, but that's just not true.
I think
It's
this is clearly a debate. Okay,
It's a
okay.
fully
I
funded
will let you come back, but I've got lots of people wanting to ask questions. I'm going to take all the questions, and then I'm going to give you 2 sentences each. 2 sentences each to respond, no more, right? And I cut you dead if you do more. But I'm going to take all the questions first. I've got a gentleman over there with a beard who's not looking at me, wanting to come in with a question. Sorry, you need the microphone. Yeah.
I'd say to Ben's comment regarding why the those who are choosing not to go to uni should have to subsidise people who are, because that's how society works.
Okay.
You may as well say, why should those of us who don't get sick?
Thank you. And we had people waving their hands to ask questions at the back over here.
Yep, gentleman here, let's come to you.
Yes, you've tripled the tuition fees, but do you think we're getting 3 times the value of those fees?
Okay, 3 times the
is
price.
Is that all the questions
What about
on
the
tuition
value?
fees?
Anybody else
Any
on
more
tuition
questions
fees?
Right, now you have 2 sentences each, and not long sentences, no more. Ben, you can go first.
Just wondering how long the sentences are
I'll
going to be.
cut you dead. Don't worry, I'll cut you dead if I
Exactly.
think it's too long.
I'll add in a comma and a semicolon as well. Just in relation to your point there about tuition fees, people who go to university are notoriously able to earn an awful lot more money out of it as well.
One
I think it's
sentence. That's one
anti-progressive. In relation to the second question on better quality, places like Bath University have one of the highest student satisfaction ratings anywhere in the UK. Excellent. However, the changes in the policy hasn't necessarily increased student satisfaction at other places around the rest of the country.
Okay.
That has to be addressed.
That's your 2 sentences. Dominic?
You're absolutely right. Society is all about those with the broadest shoulders supporting the weakest, obviously. You're getting worse university tuition now because it's more about the money.
Thank you. Lorraine?
Thank
Be
you.
as brief, exemplary,
Yes.
Dominic. Thank you.
I just want to counteract what Steve said, if I could.
That's one sentence.
I stood as a Liberal Democrat councillor for the 5th time in 2011 because it was about Bath. I couldn't make a difference on tuition fees as a councillor, but I could continue to serve into 20 years as a councillor for the city with all the services that the council provides. So that's why I stood then, but I did hope that during Parliament they would revisit tuition fees and the decision they made.
That's your 2 sentences. Thank you. Ollie?
Yeah, I mean, how Steve can argue that the new system is fair is quite frankly absurd. The average student is going to be leaving university with £44,000 worth of debt. The policy is fully funded. It's going to be funded by limiting tax relief for the wealthiest pensioners.
Thank you. Okay, Julian, I'm going to let you come in first.
Thank you. Yeah, I find it astonishing to hear the Liberal, the Labour and the Conservative candidate trying to give you an answer that you want to hear about tuition fees, but the reality is that all 3 of these parties have they've introduced and they've increased tuition fees.
That's one sentence.
And I would urge you to vote, or at least consider, looking at the actual facts and disregarding some of this rhetoric.
Okay, thank you. Steve, last 2 sentences to you
On the first question the gentleman asked, I absolutely believe in having a redistributive society where those who can pay the most should pay the most, and we've been working hard within government to try and force the Conservative government along with our belief in that, and we've had some success. That's the first issue. Secondly, on tuition fees, will it lead to more value? The honest answer is time will tell, but if you look at the facts, more people are going to university than ever before, so more people have been attracted. And despite what was said about not being fair, there are now more people from disadvantaged backgrounds and from black minority ethnic backgrounds, the people who are traditionally excluded from higher education, are now accessing it. That will improve social mobility, and I hope and believe lead to fair society. People are voting with their feet.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for bearing with me on the strict 2-sentence rule there. I think we're going to wind up this session now, and it's time to find out, having heard what your candidates have to say, how you now feel about how you're going to vote. So the numbers are up there, so you know. So having heard an hour of discussion and debate, will you please press now for your voting?
So just to confirm, press 1 for Conservative, 2 for the Green Party, 3 for our independent candidate, 4 for the Labour Party, 5 for the Liberal Democrats, 6 for UKIP, and if you are still undecided, you press 7. Now, whilst these numbers are being processed, which will only take a couple of minutes to get the results, do we have any final questions from the floor for our 6 candidates? I promised to come to this lady here, so I will do. Your question, please.
It's regarding mental health crisis care. Particularly in Bath, there's been huge cuts, and service users have been finding themselves in really sticky situations on huge waiting lists, and this is really having a bad effect in society. And I want to know how you're going to help improve this situation.
Okay, so sort of waiting lists, mental health waiting lists. We did touch on this slightly earlier on. Anybody want to answer that question about what they would do about that issue? Yes, Ollie.
Yeah, I mean, completely right. The mental health budget has actually been cut. We want to increase that budget, but we particularly want to focus on tackling mental health issues among young people. Research clearly shows that the earlier on you tackle mental health problems, the less likely it is for those problems to occur later on in life. So we want to give things like teachers mental health training. We want to make sure provisions are in place to be able to spot mental health issues among young people as early as possible. We also want to make sure every single nurse has experience and mental health training as well.
Thank you very much. By the way, if you haven't voted by now, please don't vote because it won't count, but you may still be charged. You have a question?
This is for UKIP specifically, but I would like an answer probably from everyone if that's possible. You stated in your policies for children with special needs in education that you would like to see parents have their own say on where their children goes for secondary school from primary school. But the transaction from primary school to secondary school is still a challenge and still a difficulty that is being happened now. So I want to know exactly how you plan to fix that, and that would go to everyone as well.
So this is sorry, just clarify that. The transition from primary school
to secondary school.
To secondary school.
Exactly, for children with special needs, children that might not get the right amount of quality or the right amount of attention they need.
I think I understand.
Thank you.
Well, what this sort of ultimately harks back to is what I was saying earlier in terms of everybody has different educational needs, and by trying to force everybody through the same state education comprehensive system, unless, of course, they can afford otherwise, we do take children with special needs and try and force them through the same system as everyone else. I remember when I was at school, I started secondary school, and there was a guy in the class who couldn't read. And when the secondary school had finished, he still couldn't read. It was 5 years later. And, we need to set up a variety of different establishments. Grammar schools for those people that are academically gifted, but other schools, the free schools, academies, all sorts of institutions that are going to offer different environments, because you may have someone who is not very academically minded but extremely, extremely gifted in other areas. And at the moment, we don't cater for those people. So let's set up an education system that is diverse, that has lots of options. One of the schools that's recently
Okay, sorry, I'm just going to have to just speed you up a little bit.
Yeah,
because I've got other people waiting to come in and lots of people wanting to ask questions, and I want to get time for the questions. So if you can keep it literally to one sentence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think more investment and choice is possible. I think the introduction of teaching assistants has made a lot of difference into schools because they've been able to support the teachers and enabling children to attend school that perhaps those particular schools, and they may not have been able to have done that previously. So I think there is more investment in that way will make it possible for children to have that choice.
Thank you. Nolly, very briefly.
Yeah, I mean, it's an issue close to my heart. I struggled massively with incredibly severe dyslexia when I was young. I was that person that couldn't read in the class. We do have a massive issue when it comes to provisions for children with special needs in the state system. I think we need to be equipping the state system with the capacity to be able to deal with special needs. At the moment, we're still a long way off achieving that, so there's a lot of work to be done.
Okay, so you're raising lots of issues and questions which is close to everybody's heart, which is very good.
On the issue of special educational needs, I absolutely disagree with Julie, and I think that where possible, and obviously where it's appropriate for the child concerned, we should be looking to mainstream people, have them in regular schools, regular classes, but provide additional support. Because I think just with somebody who has dyslexia, it doesn't mean they should be kept aside from, say, other people who live on their street or their friends who they otherwise know. In order to ensure that they do get the attention and the support they need within mainstream education, I'm really proud. It's one of the things that was on the front cover of our Liberal Democrat manifesto. I'm really proud we delivered it. It's something called the pupil premium, and it's a chunk of additional money that follows people based on their disadvantage and their educational needs, and ensures that there's extra funding to provide extra educational support to help them. And there's evidence starting to come through. It's only been in place for about 3 years now, that already we're starting to see the gap in exam performance between rich and poor kids improve, and also we're starting to see the same thing as well for people with special educational needs. So yes, we can make mainstreaming work for all pupils, but we need to put the right investment in to ensure those people get the support they need.
We've got lots of people wanting to ask questions. John, can I suggest we take about 3 questions
Okay,
all together, and then we can...
Let's have your question then, please.
Respond.
Hi, specifically towards Labour and Conservative, I think myself and a lot of people that I know included see you as dated, and I think that's because you're all we know. Because from when we've been born to now, you guys have always been fighting for power. It's the 2 main parties. So I think that's why a lot of people are looking towards other parties now to kind of give us the things that you haven't, and what are you doing to change that?
Okay, thank you. Let's take some more questions,
and you as well?
then...
On BBC Parliament, all I seem to see is there's a lot of childish behaviour in Parliament. There's a lot of squabbling between politicians about certain policies and about things that matter and blah, 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 blah. But instead of simply pointing out what the government's doing wrong and what other parties are doing wrong, when are we going to hear what you're doing right and what you're going to do right?
Thank you.
So old-fashioned and childish. What else? Who else had a question over here? Anybody?
Somebody
right
yes,
at the
sorry,
back. I see you.
Yeah,
my question is about the legalization of marijuana, and usually it's like blown off by all politicians as just some kind of stoner, like, oh, everyone just wants to do drugs. But the state of Colorado legalized it and has now made, well, in the first month of legalizing it, they made $2.3 million and put $100,000 back into the schooling funds. So, just to you, do you think the legalization of marijuana is still a joke, basically, or is it possible?
Okay, so we've got question on old politics, question on squabbling, and question on marijuana. I'm not going to ask everybody to answer all 3, but very quickly a response.
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's a really good point as well. Ultimately, we at the moment have a voting system known as first past the post. It ultimately favours a 2-party form of politics. Long term, I'm very much in favour of looking at addressing that, maybe looking at alternative forms of political representation, alternative forms of voting. But you know, the Labour Party was founded on a certain set of values. Those values are something that we've always maintained. For a long time, it was just the Liberal Party and the Conservatives. But the point is, you know, it is easy to look at the Labour Party as part of the establishment, old politics, as you put it. But the point is, we are a progressive party. We were a progressive party when we were reformed. We've always shown that, and we're just as progressive now as we were, you know, back in the early 19th century. So, but obviously, we've got a whole new set of challenges today. So the point is, we've got to remain radical. We've got to remain progressive. So far, I think we can respond to those challenges. Ultimately, though, you know, this is an election, certainly in terms of deciding who's going to form our government between Labour and the Conservatives. And there's never been a bigger gap between the 2 parties. So there's a lot on the line.
Okay, Dominic.
Firstly, we as a party think that you should be able to do whatever you want to do as long as it doesn't hurt other people. So we are fully behind legalising pretty much all drugs. Secondly, yes, a lot of Parliament, I mean, the House of Commons is theatre, it's ridiculous. Nothing gets, you know, the fact that you can talk out bills is, I mean, it's nonsense. It's massively unfit for purpose. That's why we want to change it. Thirdly, we support PR. Of course, there's this tactical voting nonsense. Vote for what you believe in. The only way anything is going to change is voting what you believe in.
Okay, Ben?
as an example of how young people who have come to us and actually lobbied us on particular issues, a couple of weeks ago I was up at the Bath University Politics Society, and they were debating legalisation of drugs. And I came in, to be honest with you, it's not one of the main issues that comes up on the doorstep, to be honest. But they said to me, okay, what's your position on drugs? So I said, well, look, at university I had friends who got addicted to substances, and it really did ruin their lives, and they ended up having to retake their degrees, etc. as a result. So it kind of tainted my views on it. But they did provide the Colorado case, and they've been lobbying me ever since, and they've been speaking to me on Twitter, sending me backwards and forwards messages saying, okay, what's your views on this, and give me loads of examples. And I have to say, I've been open to listening, and as I've seen it and the evidence that's been provided to me, the system is not fit for purpose anymore. And this system was created decades ago to tackle an issue which has massively changed now. You know, more people are taking MDMA, for example, than they are taking ecstasy. So we really have to look at the way that we are keeping up with modern times and addressing the drugs problem. I'd like to see a whole-scale debate on this in Parliament, if, of course, in the future too.
Can I just interrupt? We will come to you, Lorraine. Okay. Can I just get, we had a slight technical hitch, so can we just do the voting process again for who you would vote for now? So, once again, don't press anything yet, but 1 for Conservative, 2 for the Green Party, 3 for the Independent, 4 Labour Party, 5 Liberal Democrats, 6 UKIP, 7 if you're undecided. So if you could please vote now. Sorry to interrupt the flow of the panel there, but just to make sure that we get these results, it will be interesting to see how they have changed over the course of this afternoon. Thank you very much.
Okay, Lorraine?
Thank you. One of the questions about the behaviour in Parliament, I think it's absolutely disgusting and disgraceful that they shout out and you cannot hear what the MP is saying. I think it's absolutely disgraceful, and that should stop, because people should be entitled to debate. Those MPs are representing their cities and towns. They're the voice of their cities and towns, and they should be heard and should have the opportunity when they're in Parliament. So that has got to stop. I mean, an example of a Conservative Member of Parliament in North East Somerset, Jacob Rees-Mogg, recently on the TV, was one of those leaders who talked and talked and talked and talked until the discussion ended and no decision was made.
Thank you, Lorraine. Thank you. Now, I'm told it's time to wrap up, so Steve and Julian.
Yeah, very quickly on 2 points. Firstly, I think we need absolute wholesale change in our democracy. The Prime Minister's question, nonsense, is the smallest part of it. We need fairer votes. Interesting, Ollie mentioned that. The only parties in front of you today who supported a referendum of fairer votes 3 years ago were the Green Party and the Liberal Democrats. We need votes for people who are 16 years old. It's been long-standing Liberal Democrat policy. I want to see it delivered. And we need a cap on big funding to take the big money out of politics, because it really is corrupting our system. In terms of on drugs, we need a grown-up approach on drugs. And I'm really proud the Liberal Democrats came out a couple of months ago and said this openly. We said it about 15 years ago. We got slammed by the right-wing media. This time, I think people are more open-minded about this. The war on drugs is not working. It's creating criminal armed gangs on every street in every country. 100,000 people killed in the last decade alone in Mexico. It's not working. For example, there's a guy called Brian Paddock. He was a police commander in London. 15 years ago, he came out and said, I'm not going to arrest anybody who's carrying a small amount of marijuana. He effectively lost his job over that. The Lib Dems made him appear. He's in the House of Lords fighting for a grown-up approach on drugs. So our policy is very clear. Firstly, we will take the drugs issue entirely out of the criminal process and move it into civil law instead. Secondly, we will not criminalize people who have got small amounts of Class C substances. Instead, our focus will be on education and on the big dealers and on the big addicts. So on helping people who are seriously addicted to whatever drug it is, help them through treatment to get off that drug, and help focus on the people who are really making serious sums of money and putting guns on our streets to protect their trade. We need a grown-up approach. We've seen not just in Colorado, but in Portugal, fantastic example of where drugs policy can work. The world didn't end when he started there. The Liberal Democrats will have a similar grown-up approach in this country as well.
Okay, thanks. And finally,
combining the two questions, I think you're right to be cynical about the current political status and the current political class. It is a charade, and they have become hugely disconnected from normal people. The first past the post voting system has almost locked in the three-party system that we have, and tactical voting has kept them there. But now we are entering a time when that is changing. For the first time, the Greens and UKIP are coming up, more than they ever have done. the European elections that use a different voting system obviously saw a very, very different result. We obviously won those, and it shows that when the public vote how they really believe as opposed to how they want to tactically vote, you get a very, very different result. And the way that politics works, if you take the drug issue, Ben sat there and given a lovely answer to the gentleman at the back about how he's open to the debate and he wants to have the discussion, and it all sounds very lovely, doesn't it? But the reality is that when if he ever does get to Parliament in his political career, which I'm sure he will do at some stage because he's intent on getting there, the Conservative Party will most likely tell him how he needs to vote on that. So it doesn't matter how much he debates it with you. Our political system in Parliament will instruct him how he has to vote on that, and that's the result that you'll get. So I think we need to see less whipping of MPs, so MPs in Parliament can vote more how they like, and let's have a voting system that allows people to vote with their beliefs, as opposed to voting to keep the least bad person out.
We had a chance 3 years ago when your party opposed it.
Thank you very much.
Right.
Yep.
I'm going to...
Results
not entirely true.
Thank you. I think the results are now in. So, drum roll. I think the first thing on the screen is we're going to see how people were intending to vote when they came in to this debate. So, hopefully...
Discussion, not debate, discussion.
Discussion.
Yes.
Sorry, John. Discussion.
Yes.
Sorry. So, have we got the results? Okay.
So I'm slightly confused. Is that now?
That's
or is
Green Party. That says who would you vote for now?
This is when people first came in.
This is when people first came in. Okay, so Green. Okay, and this is now. Can we just? We can't see them side by side. Can we not? No.
So that was the first poll.
So the first poll, Green Party in the lead, followed by... Sorry, you're doing it too quickly for me.
We'll try and get the two side by side so we can...
Okay.
There we go. Quick work. Thank you.
It'd be great if we can get them side by side. Okay, we have to remember this is a small sample of 32. This is not no polling organisation worth its salt would publish this as a representative poll. Okay, so the Green Party has increased its vote. And the Lib Dems have stayed the same, as have UKIP. And actually, undecided has increased. So there are more people who don't quite know how they're going to vote, having heard the discussion, than there were at the start. So interesting. Can I thank all of you, not just those of you who voted, but all of you for all your questions and engagement with the politicians today. I hope you feel they've engaged with you, but thank you, first of all, for engaging with them.
Thank you very much. That concludes our time here at the college. Thank you to our audience. Thank you for watching online. And thank you, of course, to the 6 candidates for taking time out of their busy campaign schedules. This programme will be available in an edited version online on the college YouTube channel shortly. But for now, from Carol and myself and the candidates, it's goodbye.